Hello, viewers. Tonight, I'm going to talk about blackface once again. This is quite an easy subject for me to address, especially in regard to Asia. And that is indeed what I'm going to be doing. I did it once before in regard to the Akira Toriyama images of blackface, and I am going to do this once again in regard to Yoko Ishii. Yoko Ishii is a Japanese conservative commentator basically in Japan. And as I said in a video a very long time ago at this point, Japanese conservatism is very different from what we consider to be American conservatism, so to speak. In other words, United States conservatism, to be specific. United States conservatism is quite different as a political movement, and should be, if considered in a patriotic sense, in diametrical opposition to Japanese conservatism. Because Japanese conservatism sort of promotes the idea of a refanged Japanese military and Japanese military-industrial complex. Now that may seem somewhat obvious to many of us. Many of us would say, well, every nation should have its own military strength. And this is not necessarily practical because some countries have a history of basically engaging in very rampant imperialism. We could say the same thing for the United States. However, from a conservative perspective, in an American sense, why Japanese and American conservatives have now sort of coalesced into an alliance is very strange, because for the most part Japanese conservatives are essentially against the United States decision to curtail Japanese military strength. Now, the reason Japanese military strength was curtailed was because not only did they engage in aggression in China, in different countries, even as far as the Philippines, basically all over East Asia and even beyond to some extent. They went to Southeast Asia. They went to very many countries, including Korea. The idea of what many people want, or at least many Japanese conservatives want, if they were to gain any sort of military strength as they had once had, in which basically they engaged in hostility with various neighbors. And I'm not trying to essentially say that I agree with United States military dominance, but I'm simply saying this. Why American conservatives, such as the ones on Fox News, who do have Yoko Ishii on their programming, and other American conservatives who sort of support Yoko Ishii, who for whatever reason involves herself in discussions about American politics. Who can say? All right? Now, the point of relation that Japanese conservatives have with American conservatives, and for those of you who may think, wait, is Wayward Ascetic, is he a conservative? Is he a liberal? Is he speaking against conservatism or liberalism? No. I have been very frank about the fact that I am a Christian. I am not involved in any of these political ideologies or ideas. The only thing I can serve is the faith. My faith in the Most High God. So I do not need to have any sort of political insecurities or worries about what happeneth in this world. However, I do commentate. I am a critic, an average YouTuber, so I feel the need to speak about this phenomenon of conservative Japanese people like Yoko Ishii who basically commentate on American issues, Americans themselves, in what we are going to be talking about, blackface and other people of the black social status. And I do try to say people of the black social status, people of the white social status, because that is indeed a complexion-based idea based upon a system. The terms black and white, and I've said it many times before on this channel, I will continue to say it. Many people are very comfortable with saying black and white. And it is true. In an ideological and metaphysical and even spiritual sense, black and white are realities, but not in a physical sense. In other words, when we say black or white in regard to people, we are speaking abstractly. In other words, physically, on a very real level, on a sensory level, we do not see any black or white people. As you can see, the screen is black. You will never see any person that looks like that. All right? You will not. Unless, of course, you count the very racist depiction that Akira Toriyama did with Mr. Popo, where you literally had a character with black skin. And we are going to talk about blackface. And if you want to watch a video about Akira Toriyama and his use of blackface, you can watch my video about that. We are going to be listening to a video by Yoko Ishii in which she defends blackface. Now, we are not going to play this video, however, I do have that video. I do have it right here, but we are not going to play it. If Yoko Ishii is listening, I would simply like to say I will not abuse copyright at all. However, considering that she may very well be an individual who, like many, are very, how should it be said? Very analytical regarding videos that may sort of reference them. She is going to see I'm not going to play her video. I'm going to play audio of her video. I do have an MP3 file. So I have commentary gameplay that I will be playing, and we will simply hear her voice. That is what we will hear. We will not be playing her video. She will have no grounds for copyright. This will be entirely transformative content. I do believe criticism can be constructive. I do believe criticism can be edifying. And this is something that I often do say upon my channel. For any individuals, Japanese or otherwise, who may think, you are criticizing Yoko Ishii, how dare ye, how dare thee do such a thing? That is well and good. And I do know that some, including Yoko Ishii, if she's listening, is probably wondering, what type of English are you using? You're saying ye and thee. Who are you? Someone from Shakespeare. This is something I often do. I often utilize modern, early modern English. We practice that upon this channel. So ye is sort of an objective, sort of using you as the object. But before, in early modern English, you did not just simply say you. When something sort of referenced a person in a sort of objective sense, that would often be considered ye. In some cases, you use you. In regard to a singular address, in some cases, you use thee and thou. So I do like to use these words. So I'm not trying to be needlessly confusing to people. This is just simply that I use in these terms, these words a great deal, and I've gotten so used to using them that oftentimes, even in regard to conversation or Just me making videos, I use these words. Anyhow, because I do know we have some speakers of English, because it is the international language, who come from other countries. They may be watching the videos too, and they may wonder, why am I using words like this? Some people may wonder what they even mean. If I say peradventure, I'm saying perhaps. When I say hail, that means H-A-L-E as a salutation. Hail means health. So this is me saying health to all of you, health to every single one of you. If I, for example, goodbye as a valediction, as a sort of farewell. Goodbye means God be with ye. It was just abbreviated. Many people do not know what these words mean. This is very much an English channel, a history channel, a channel in which I commentate upon all manner of social issues. Before we begin, I suppose I should say I have nothing against Yoko Ishii on a personal level. I am beyond that in the sense that I am merely a Christian. I am not trying to gain in the world. I have no real interest regarding any sort of gains or advancements or advantages in the world or politics at all. We as Christians, we are here to die and then meet the Lord. Some people may think that is strange, but so be it. And talking like that is very odd. But I could reference many other thinkers and other individuals who had the same opinion as me, as well as the early Christian church, which I identify with. Anyhow, we will begin. When I talk about Japan, this is not done to denigrate Japan. This is done to review and talk about history. This is not to, as some may think, as Yoko Ishii may say, they do not want us Japanese people to be proud of ourselves. I think it is foolish to be proud of a country anyhow. When you speak of an abstract collective is not attributed to you as an individual. And this is not me sort of creating some type of definition for individualism at all. This is just me talking on a general level. Groups are comprised of individuals. And every singular one of those individuals has a different disposition, mind, and character and particular person, whether the personhood is considered on a societal level or in any other sense. But anyhow, I ramble sort of with abandon, with no real concern of how confusing whatever I'm saying may seem. Anyhow, we're talking about Yoko Ishii, we're talking about blackface, we're talking about specifically blackface in Japan. So how should I begin this? When I was talking about the connection between American conservatism and Japanese conservatism, the point of interest is not the national interest of Japan as a country. To speak frankly, Japan, or at least Japanese conservative individuals, many of which who consider themselves to be a good deal more manly than many of their liberal counterparts in Japan, would very much like a sort of embolden Japan. In other words, they want their military back, they want their military strength back, they want their sort of cultural pride back, even though the population is aging and there are high rates of, how should it be said, self-murder. Now, do you see how gracefully I sort of transitioned that word that starts with an S? We know what self-murder is. All right? Now, that word may very well not very well be considered good by YouTube algorithms either. But either way, I avoided saying that word that we know of. That starts with S-U-I and so forth. Anyhow, I try to keep the conversation, or rather the monologue, flowing. I usually do not try to replace words for the interest of YouTube or any other platform. I get so few views as it is. Excuse me, I really do not think me saying any particular word would really help. And she gets very few views as well when you consider how many subscribers she has, which is 53,000 subscribers, and she's only getting, what, 4 weeks ago, 378 views on YouTube. Is an awfully terrible platform. TikTok is much better. In sooth. That is just the truth of it. And I do know that is a Chinese platform, which is interesting because Yoko Ishii does have a good deal of opinions about both China and Korea. But anyhow, it is not for me to speak on that matter. You can take a look for yourself and come to your own conclusions about what she may think of China or Korea. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned in regard to nations which are abstract ideas and not really concrete things, I have no real sort of interest or sort of, how should I say, vested interest in any of their sort of gains or lack of gains or whatever you may call it in any sort of perceived sense. All right? But anyhow, what is the point of interest between American and Japanese conservatives? Mostly sort of social ideas and socially cultural ideas, many of which are related to Nazi ideas of societal purity. Many people consider, how should it be said, Japan to be an ethnically homogenous and racially homogenous country, with the superior or the so-called dominant group being, how should it be said, the Yamato Japanese. Excuse me. The Yamato Japanese subjugated the Ainu, and the Ryukyuans, the Okinawans. I'm not pronouncing that word right. The Okinawans and the Ainu. And if you consider the Buracumans, or their particular social caste that is considered to be less than some other particular groups of Japanese, that's a third group. But we know that Japan being a totally homogenous country is ridiculous. This is because in Japan, in Japanese conversation, Ainu and Okinawans are not really talked about that often. And so many people, when they discuss Japan, completely forget to mention other ethnic and racial groups. Groups with different racial features. Groups with a history in the country, but they are not really talked about because obviously the Yamato Japanese were the conquerors of the Ainu, of, the Okinawans, of all of these different groups of people who have a history of the country. In the country, there was an old Shinto idea that Japan will one day conquer Korea. It had been done once before, or at least the attempt was done once before during World War II. That really did happen. And so many Japanese, even in their own religion, there is an idea of the Yamato, the sort of Japanese person of that particular bloodline, of that particular lineage, being superior in the national sense. This is a country in which the emperor was considered to be God. So, what does that entail in regard to World War II when Japanese gained, how should it be said, a great deal of presence in the world, but also, all right, what am I going to look for? Japanese Nazi Party. Okay. So this is what I am looking for. I did talk about this before in another particular video. I am looking for this particular video. Because there is a Nazi party in Japan, and there are many politicians who support it and support some of their members. But anyhow, I did have this particular video, I did locate the video in my last video. Let me take a look. Alright, and of course we know about the Taiwanese who sort of don Nazi clothing. The idea, here we go. We have a Japanese neo-Nazi. There's a neo-Nazi party in Japan. Vice Japan covered this. Okay. Now let me play this where he says what he feels like saying. Let me play this back. Because he said something very interesting in one of these. Let me take a look. Take a look here.
僕がまだね、子供の頃はその戦争の本とか本屋さん行って並んでるでしょ。でヒトラー伝とかムッソルイニ伝とか売られてて、ヒトラーが完全今みたいな 100% の悪い。
Let me see. But basically, I can't really find when he says that, you know, he states a quote in there, or rather he says something in particular in there that was very interesting. But anyhow, you now know there's a Japanese Nazi party. Alright? So if you want to know where that video is, just go to Vice Japan. You can look at that. You can watch that video. Now, I'm not going to try to play very much more of that. I really do not want to get in trouble with copyright. So, you know, that is just a reality in Japan. There's a Japanese Nazi party in Japan. You may ask, what is the significance of a Japanese Nazi party being in Japan? Well, the significance of that is that basically, during World War II, Japan was allied with the Nazi German party. Now, during that time, Japanese individuals, under the definition of how should it be said, Nazi Japan were considered to be honorary Aryans. In other words, these people were considered to be part of the Aryan race. You may ask, what is an Aryan? Aryans were essentially Iranians, Persians. During a certain period of time, they went into the Indus River Valley and basically massacred and subjugated the Dasyu people in India. They basically subjugated the Dravidian people in India and all of the dark aboriginal people in India who had traveled from Africa, as stated by Apollonius in his writings, to India, to the Indus River Valley. They created a very advanced or rather developed civilization. The Aryans conquered them and essentially made India their own, and essentially took the Dasyu culture and the aboriginal culture of those lands and mixed it with their own Aryan culture and created their own system of Brahmanism and caste system in which the Aryan was superior to the Dasyu. Dasyu in Sanskrit means servant. This was the idea. The idea behind how should it say, Varna caste system is that Varna means colors. Varna is also caste. In other words, color and caste are entirely related to the Indian idea. The Aryan idea is itself one of the oldest forms of complexion-based bigotry in the world. Do you understand? This has a whole presence in Asia, going back to a very long time ago. There are Aboriginal dark people in Thailand, the Manu tribe. There are Aborigine, I think it's the Mani tribe, and then you have the Eta tribe in the Philippines. Those people from Africa, or wherever they came from, we could say that it is Africa or anywhere else, whatever we would think. There were dark people there, is essentially my point. This is historically recorded. This is archaeologically recorded. This is a known idea. The Aryan idea is an idea that goes all the way back to the Brahmin caste system and the time that predated the modern day India, or rather the idea, or rather the India in which there were actually Aryans in India. In other words, there were darker people in India. The Aryan idea is that the Aryans came, were lighter skinned. In many of the Hindu writings, they talk about how the native inhabitants, the indigenous inhabitants, the Dasyu, and all of these aboriginal people of India had flat noses, darker skin, and they were ugly. This was in their eyes, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's subjective unless we're talking about the ultimate sense in which the creator gets to judge. And him being perfectly good would, of course, have the ultimate definition of beauty. In a sort of philosophical opinion, the prime mover, God, whatever you would, consider him or call him. Anyhow, the Aryan idea is very old. Through the writings of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and many other individuals, who would become very popular in, the Weltanschauungs of particular German individuals, as well as the zeitgeist, that is to say, the spirit of the time at that particular period in history. This Aryan idea, which goes all the way back to India, in which they had their conquest of the aboriginal peoples and their own destruction and subjugation of those peoples, who to this day are still contending with bigotry due to their darker skin, in relation to, their lighter skinned Aryan counterparts. Aryan is a very ancient concept of racism, of complexion-based bigotry that goes back a long, long time. And when we are regarding race, we are regarding, how should it be said, that which is of a kind, a species, so to speak, a sort of individual group, or rather something defined with defined differences. Very loosely defined, I might add, a social construct that is utilized to sort of define a particular group or classify a particular type of people. Anyhow, this Aryan idea is very old, essentially. Japanese people were considered such by the Germans, who, as I had said, were basically mixing different ideas about paganism and theosophy and sort of creating their own type of religion, influenced by all manner of ideas, especially those of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and many of the nationalistic people of that time, people who wanted to find their identity as pale European people and wanted to curtail the presence and influence of darker skinned as well as different ethnic groups on their society, in their society. So there was this idea of the Romani, there was this idea of the Ashkenazi individual gaining a type of, how should it be said, presence in German society that was not really wanted by what many consider to be the ethnically and racially pure German. We could say the same thing about the racially and ethnically pure Yamato. And in Japan, there was a great deal, and still is a great deal, of what may be called paper genocide, in which if you are an Ainu, or if you are an Okinawan or anything else, there are many systems and powers of the government being utilized to essentially classify them as basically, you're just a Yamato Japanese, just like any other Yamato Japanese. After all, Japan is how should it say, a homogeneous country. No, it is not. How a so-called homogeneous country is able to essentially be classified as such is because that particular homogeneous country had a government that wanted to destroy the identities of particular racial and ethnic groups that were present in the country, and all is classified under one. We are all Yamato, or we are all Japanese. In Japan, it is just very interesting, and that is a whole nother discussion. Anyhow, there were some non-Nordic people who were considered to be Aryans, and this is obvious by definition. Obviously, if you look into the historical, sort of truth regarding Aryans, Aryans were what? Iranians, land of the Aryans. They are, if anything, Near Eastern, or sort of Asian in a sense, or very close to it. They entered Asia. They dominated the aboriginal darker people, such as Dravidians and Dasu people, and gained hegemony there. And this was also the case in the Philippines, in which you had the lighter-skinned people who dominated the Eta and the darker aboriginal-skinned people. In regard to Japan, you had the Yamato Japanese who migrated to Japan and essentially dominated, subjugated, destroyed Ainu civilizations. This is very simple. So, why am I talking about this? Because one of the things that many Japanese conservatives, to some extent, have is what Hitler may consider to be pride in their own race. A sort of, how should it be said? Here's one of the reasons why Hitler's like them. However, in the case of the Japanese people to whom Adolf Hitler bestowed the following title, following the anti-Comintern Pact on Communism signed in 1936, it seemed that they were granted this status not simply, and that status is honorary Aryan, not simply for economic, military, or political reasons, but more so because of their apparent racial integrity. The political testament of Hitler, Adolf Hitler, stated, "Pride in one's own race, and that does not imply contempt for other races, is also a normal and healthy sentiment. I have never regarded the Chinese or Japanese as being inferior to ourselves. They belong to ancient civilizations, and I admit that their past history is superior to our own." Now, this is Hitler saying this, telling other people that essentially these Japanese and Chinese predate the Aryan idea in Germany. In other words, these people had this idea of pale supremacy far before we did. And this is an idea in Japan. Many people in Japan, they do not want many immigrants to come there to Japan. The Filipinos are now getting working as nurses in Japan. The population in Japan is aging. Many of the people in Japan, they want very corporate jobs. They do not want to work as nurses. They are in situations in which you have older people, and many of the nurses, the skilled nurses working there, are Filipinos and Filipinas. So because of that, immigration is happening. And whether the Japanese conservative likes that or not, all of these people ought to start having more kids or just stop complaining because they are not having many children. And because of this, and that is just my opinion. That is just my opinion. I think if anyone should complain, obviously why complain when you can just go into the bed and just have some children? But obviously, there are problems like that. There are situations in which there's abortion in Japan, and instead of going and just basically denouncing abortion, what happens? You have some Japanese who go to a Shinto shrine and give an offering for their deceased infant because they know it's wrong, but they still want to, and this is me saying this, in my opinion it is wrong. They want to go to the Shinto shrine and give the little offerings to whatever kami spirits or whatever spirit is essentially associated with the infant that they essentially dispatched, all right, slew, what have thee. But anyhow, that happens. So she's talking about Hungary's growing birth rate. I just find it interesting that she's really referring to that when Japan, regarding birth rate, people who are complaining about immigration should think about that. But anyhow, Japan has a massive porn industry, and yet their birth rate is down. So people are obviously thinking about sex. It is just that whatever type of sex they're having is not conducive to life. And that is interesting. But anyhow, yes. What I am saying is that the point of interest between Japanese and American conservatism is the idea of racial and cultural integrity. In other words, the idea that Japanese people are really sort of staunch conservatives and racially pure and homogenous, and they sort of, how should it be said, have this type of integrity that the United States does not have anymore. So even though Japan was obviously an enemy of the United States and an ally of Axis Germany, they are still considered to be, what? You know, now they are allies to some Japanese conservatives. You know, to some American conservatives, or rather I should say. So Yoko Ishii is often upon Fox News, which I would think if you were an American patriot, why ever you would think that you could have any sort of interest being aligned with Japanese conservatives who want a refanged, a sort of re-empowered Japanese military is odd to me, considering that so many Americans fought so hard against Japanese people. The war crimes were terrible. And this is another thing that Yoko Ishii does. She talks about war crimes and essentially denies them or underplays them and says the war crimes were not so bad. We Japanese did some very good things for those Chinese people. But anyhow, we are going to be talking about blackface. Alright, so I guess without further ado, I should just get started. So let me play this. Let me cut it up so that you can hear it and we can play this. Alright.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's me, Yoko. It's nice to see you all again. In this video, let me introduce this racism controversy that's been going on here in Japan. It happened on the last day of last year, and it's been going on since then. I guess that it was brought up by many people, but particularly this black man is like the origin of this controversy, I would say. Like, he's on the news. There's this man, Baye McNeil. I'm not sure the pronunciation, but in Japanese his name is Makuniru, so I'm gonna stick to that. He's a black man living in Yokohama Prefecture, Japan, and he's been living there for 13 years, it seems. And he's an author, columnist, lecturer, born in Brooklyn, reborn in Yokohama, his Twitter profile says. There are only like 3,800 followers on his Twitter, and nobody knew who he was. I guess the majority doesn't even know who he is still, but he got kind of famous in Japan after this controversy that he created.
Which, why ever would that matter? So that is a sort of, that's a sort of little snide remark that she decided to make. But anyhow, we are going to be looking at definitions as she talks. And how she cannot say Baye McNeil, I have no idea. Anyhow, so we have, what is racism? Racial prejudice or discrimination. We're going to be looking at some of these concepts as she basically talks. Alright.
Created, and I guess that he's been selling his name overseas as well. Okay, so what did he do? He criticized this TV show that he was watching as it had blackface. And it was done by our super popular comedian here named Masatoshi Hamada, and the blackface was about 35 minutes long. So a little thing to note here is that he's one of the comedian duo named Downtown, and the other guy, Hitoshi Matsumoto, he sometimes makes a conservative-leaning comment and it becomes news and so on. So obviously, as you can see, there was a blackface on TV here, okay. But the important question here is, was Hamada, the comedian, was he insulting black people or black community? No, I feel like this black claimer is intentionally doing...
And this is quite something, because the very idea of blackface is racist. The very idea of it is racist. And you may say, and I thought maybe I can sort of inch my way into this idea. This is called, and I showed this before, this is encounters, facing the West. I said it says facing West, but I guess I like the way I said it best. The great encounter through Japanese eyes. So Westerns came, Commodore Perry, and different Americans were coming. And so the Japanese drew what they saw. They brought technology. They brought so-called innovations. They painted some of these pale Euro-American men. They really recorded this. The Americans showed them quite a lot. They showed them their technology. They showed them their different machines. And they also showed them blackface a long time ago. They gave them a shipboard entertainment. For the Japanese, it featured a minstrel show. They painted their faces black. They put wool on their heads. And they essentially pretended to be black people to show the Japanese this is what a black person is. This is a person who is a funny person. This is a novel person. This is a novelty. This is an individual who's ridiculous. His very appearance is ridiculous. This is what blackface is, and this is why Americans and Europeans went around the world and showed people blackface. Blackface was in a sense an exhibition of black features of black people as being ridiculous, funny people who are not worthy of respect but worthy of ridicule and laughter. This is what we, as foundational people of the black social status, have to deal with. So this is why, and this is the obvious reason why, blackface is a bigoted art form. This is why every time there is blackface, every time there is an instance of blackface, there are people of the black social status who say this form of, if you think this is comedic, if you think this is funny, we know why. Because we are the joke, and we are a joke to you as individuals. Our very features are funny to you, and that is why we criticize it and we go against it in every way that we can. We are vociferously against it, those of us who are individuals of the black social status and know our history. Because when a Japanese person is considered to be an honorary Aryan, that is essentially honorary white social status. And in Japan, when you adopt blackface, you are essentially finding amusement in the features of black people. Now, would they paint their faces pale to sort of look like a pale European man? No, they would not. Because after all, well, to some extent they do that with skin whitening cream, or at least some individuals. Not all Japanese people use skin whitening cosmetics, some of them do. However, being already pale enough, why would they need to pale their faces with any type of paint to imitate or impersonate a pale European person? They do not need to do it. However, there is the idea of painting your face brown that goes back in history a very long time. It just simply is not needed. If you want to some extent, imitate a comedian, you do not need to paint your face brown or black. That is ridiculous. You do not need to sort of imitate in a feature sense and sort of bring up an old art form that was taught to Japanese people, the Japanese people are keenly aware of, that they know about, because it is part of their history, and display it for all the world to see. Because if you do, those of us who know this history will mention it, and we will say Japanese people have a long history of denigrating black people, people of the black social status, that is to say, that was created by pale people. Not to mention the fact that they have their own sort of not to their own sort of racial and ethnic caste systems within Japan regarding Okinawans and Ainu people. And you can go to the Minority Rights Report if you do not believe it. If they are not discriminated against, why is this well recorded? We could say the same thing about the Philippines. So this is about us being aware and knowing about history and being prepared for anything. If you are a person of the black social status, this is a matter of not only survival, but dignity. This is a matter of dignity. This is more important than survival, you could say, and I do believe it is. Dignity is more important than so-called carnal survival. Those of us who are Christian do not really care so very much about the concept of living in the world so much as keeping our spiritual, metaphysical, ideological dignity, because the spiritual is more important than the physical. And so, for us as individuals, regardless of who you are, you want to have your dignity. So this is why I am talking about this. I do not care about the rise and fall of nations. I am talking about mental integrity, dignity, something that has to do with your mind, your spirit. We are not talking about the physical component of the soul of the person. We are talking about the metaphysical idea of you as an individual being mocked for your hair, your skin, and who you are, you know, from your mother's womb. This is what we are talking about. The idea of blackface is racist based on the whole history of it in the United States and Japan, because the Americans from the United States taught Japanese people blackface. They taught them this art form. They use it because they were taught that art form, and that art form has remained in Japan till this day. It is still being used in Japan. The history of these matters has been recorded and is well known. All right? Now, this whole exhibition being shown online was 2008, but these pictures have been had for a very long time. And the idea of complexion, the idea of a pale face and pale skin being something superior to darker skin is very well known. All we have to do is look at geisha culture, the idea of painting your skin white. This is not a matter of insult. This is a matter of honor, because for the most part, pale skin is considered to be superior to darker skin. In terms of utility, it most certainly is not. It burns in the heat. It burns under the sun. It ages faster. It is not as thick and smooth. For the most part, in terms of utility, pale skin is vastly inferior. The same thing can be said of pale eyes. But for whatever reason, people seem to ignore the fact that pale skin is valorized in Japan and darker skin is considered. Obviously, if you valorize one particular type of skin and you consider darker skin to be unpreferential in regard to beauty, it is also very obvious that a people of that sort cannot truly appreciate darker skinned people in any wise or fashion, because by their very beauty standard, understanding concept of beauty, darker skin is considered to be inferior and ugly, and so they want to pale their skin with either skin whitening cream or anything else. So there are Japanese people who are realizing this. This is why a particular skin whitening company in Japan is no longer, they've removed such words as whitening and lightening from their products, because they understand that this understanding of pale skin being superior or more beautiful than darker skin, whether it be natural Asian skin, which is sort of tan and yellowish and off those sort of light brown hues, is something to be denigrated, and pale skin is something to be considered to be better. They understand that this is a statement regarding complexion. They understand what it means. They understand what type of mindset is behind this declaration. That is a very strong statement to make, even in regard to beauty. All right, because essentially if white or pale skin, as it is called, is considered to be beautiful, better, superior, more excellent, fair, what have thee, then this would mean, well, any darker shade is by definition ugly. But anyhow, and you have that regarding you also have the history of Japan being an ally to the World War II, Axis Germany, their understanding of themselves being honorary Aryans, accepting that title from the Nazi German party. Obviously, she thinks it's funny. As you can see, this thumbnail speaks volumes about her understanding of this whole concept of blackface. She likes it. It is funny to her. No surprise. Her people, or at least I am not going to say her people, because obviously we're talking about specific individuals. Groups are comprised of individuals. Not everyone is like her. Not every Japanese person is like her. Most certainly not. However, it would have to be said, there were people who were Japanese who were given this form of comedy, who were given this art form, and they preserved it. They preserve it even today. They use it even today. So the idea of the black man or the black woman or the black child, people of the black social status, being comedic, funny, their very existence being something humorous, is not a new idea in Japan. This is a very old idea. This is a very old concept. All right? So let us continue. Because obviously my commentary is going to be a great deal more substantive than her own, I would say.
Things in a tricky way because it doesn't give you the background. McNeil has to give out the background as well, you know, but he's not telling that, and it upsets me. But yeah, the comedians here, they don't just disguise themselves as black people, but also they dress up themselves as whatever they want to be, like characters from anime or movies or even social icons like Trump or Obama. And with that in mind, the TV show that he criticized is such a popular show. Every time after the comedian Hamada changes his costume, he's supposed to become a female because it's just their tradition. But this time, out of the blue, he showed up as Eddie Murphy's character from the movie Beverly Hills Cop. And it took people by surprise, and everyone was laughing, even on Twitter. Like, you can see the happy reactions on Twitter. So here's the funny thing. So is it...
And I would have to say, it may be funny to Japanese people, but it is not funny to people of the black social status. Now, if that was a country in which people in the black social status were not in the country, which they are, they see all of the comedy that is done. They understand when someone is doing blackface, and the history of people of the black social status, the denigration of them and their features is well known all over the world, and you do it anyhow. And this has been a matter that has been addressed in Japanese media many times. This is not some novel phenomenon. This is not the first time a Japanese person has done it, and other people have said something about it. And not to mention, there's a matter of historical ignorance. What race do you know of in which, do you know of any other race, viewers, in which a particular set of racial features is literally the joke in and of itself? Do you know of any other race where there's a whole art form regarding it? There's a whole dedicated art form regarding the replication with paint and hair and everything else of basically Negroid features for the purpose of amusement and laughter, to make everyone laugh. After all, a black person is funny, and so I dress up like a black person. Black people are funny. This is the history of blackface. So whether one say of, I'm doing this, you know, to make me seem like Eddie Murphy, it is not needed. And to say this is just cosplay, you go all the way through the trouble painting your face brown And you really think that that is in some wise flattering? As though you do not know the history of the denigration of people of the black social status all over the world? And there is a history of people of the black social status in Asia. Whether you're talking about the Mani tribe in Thailand, the Ada tribe in the Philippines, whether you talk about the lesser known, and they would not be, I would not consider these people of the black social status, but in regard to their caste status in Japan, Ainu and Okinawans are not treated well either. And Okinawans are generally darker than the average Yamato Japanese person. So these nuances of race, culture, and ethnicity are understood in Japan. And for people to not really consider any sort of education, any sort of social enlightenment and future understanding to it all be necessary, it's just simply an entrenched bigotry. It could be said. This is not a bad thing. If he did not know any better, he can learn. Because now, we have Japanese countries that are essentially trying to address matters of complexion-based bigotry that they themselves acknowledge. They do not want to be perceived by their own countrymen and the world to be bigoted in a racist or coloristic way. And I often do not like even saying the word coloristic, because to me, essentially, I call it pale supremacist, because this is the idea of pale being supreme in a racial sense. So, anyhow, and there is that pale supremacy, not necessarily a white social status supremacy, but it is the same thing, but in the same sense. In other words, complexion-based bigotry. So, very interesting. Let me continue to play this video of hers.
Isn't it interesting that it's okay for male comedians here to disguise themselves as females, which they do all the time, or it's okay for the comedian...
That is itself a completely different matter. It does not come with the same history of literally an art form that has basically been used by people who were not of the black social status to essentially mock people of the black social status. People of the white social status taught Japanese people blackface. This has been historically recorded. They brought Japanese people upon their ships and taught them this art form. There's a whole history of blackface being performed in Japan by people of the white social status. So, this is not a confusing concept. This is not some idea that any of us need to deny or sort of play coy about. That is not the same as dressing up as a woman. What a ridiculous way to equate such a matter. Very interesting.
Comedian and movie director Takeshi Kitano to disguise himself as Trump. Or it's okay for a comedian here to disguise himself as Obama. Or it's okay for another comedian here to disguise himself as a white guy from the Beverly Hills. And it's not okay for Hamada to disguise himself as Eddie Murphy. How does it work? Like, whoever criticizing this is racist.
So, a person is racist for criticizing something, which is what is being done. A person is racist for criticizing something. That is quite a statement. You're racist for criticizing something, having a contrary opinion to basically the people that promote an art form that has the very history of literally racial discrimination that was introduced to Japan by basically pale Americans. Anyhow, that is what? The unfair treatment of people who belong to a different race, violent behavior towards them. That's from the Oxford Learner's Dictionary. Any action, practice, or belief that reflects the race, that's another one. But essentially, to consider people criticizing blackface to essentially be racist, what a projection. What a projection on her part. How would she ever know that? We have a criticism of a particular art form that has a history in Japan and the United States. We think that it is harmful to the image of basically people of the black social status all over the world, and we speak about it. Do any of us have any capability to force Japanese people to stop engaging in the art form, the denigrating art form of blackface? No. All we can do is talk about it. So her saying that the people who criticize blackface are racist just goes to show how facile her arguments are. She does not have any argument against, our actual substantive criticism that are verified by the history of blackface in Japan. We can find pictures about it. We can find writings about Japanese people being introduced to it and engaging in it, and their understandings of black people, even from the writings and sort of, not to mention the Japanese Nazi Party. They were honorary Aryans, and they accepted that status. There were particular individuals who really considered themselves to be honorary Aryans. And that sort of Weltanschauung is very much alive in Japan, which puts obviously darker skinned people who may have who did migrate to Japan or had children in Japan in diametric opposition to those particular individuals. We are opposed on an ideological level, and that ideological opposition is going to occur whether she likes it or not. And we do have substantive disagreements with the use of blackface in Japan even using the term. There is no term for painting your face white that has been recorded, that has been utilized historically. What is white face? What is Asian face? No, there's blackface. All right, this particular term is used about a sort of mockery of people of the black social status. The very term itself infers mockery because that is the definition of it. That is how it has been used historically. For her to say that blackface is anything less than mockery does not even make any sense historically, because blackface was a term created to describe that particular art form in which black people of the black social status were mocked. Anyhow, let me continue.
Do you think, why? They're using one side of comedy aspects for politics, and I think that's rather a problem. If it's about black people, then why didn't black community fight against the comedian that was pretending to be Obama? I wonder McNeil bashes Halloween too, right? Everybody dress up. And it can be black people as well. Are there controversies like that? We all have colors, so it's just impossible.
And the ignorance, the idea of playing ignorant, of playing naive, as though you do not know why people of the black social status are criticizing the use of blackface in comedy or anywhere else. This is something that people are being educated about, and that's all that is happening. They are not being brought to court. They are not receiving any type of penalties for this. It is just that people of the black social status are saying this is, in our opinion, offensive. There is a history behind this, and this is something that is done to belittle us.
I feel like if McNeil was a Japanese guy, then he would bash foreigners wearing kimono, because it's just racist, right? I don't get it, but there are people like that.
And one would have to ask, what is racist about wearing an article of clothing? I would think what the Japanese military did in Korea, in China, in the Philippines, one could consider that whole history racist. How many Japanese people are wearing pants, Western pants? How can clothing be protected? And it even annoys me when people say, well, a person of the white social status should not wear dreadlocks. Well, and it is obvious since black people of the black social status, people with phenotypically Negroid characteristics came before people of the white social status, or at least not even regarding status, Caucasoid peoples. Obviously, darker people are the ancestors of paler peoples. And so their ancestors, had such hair. And so if they want to use dreadlocks, they're doing nothing less than simply doing what their ancestors did, because their ancestors were what we may call Negroid or African or whatever you would say they were. All right? In regard to a kimono, that is something very strange. A kimono is an article of clothing. Wearing a kimono is not painting your face brown or black and putting on some sheep wool on your head and pretending to be a person of the black social status. It is not that. That is a false equivalency. That is absolutely, in my opinion, it is so very facile. Because there is a literally recorded history of this particular type of mockery. And this is why darker people and even some Japanese people have a problem with what is called blackface. You see, in this video, if it were simply a common thing to paint your face brown and to do what that man was doing, she would not say blackface gets bashed. So we would have to say, what is the definition of blackface? What is she talking about? And you see, the reason it is so pronounced when a person imitates Negroid characteristics is because that we as basically people of the black social status were given that status due to our considerably darker skin from most pale Europeans, pale Asians, paler Aryans in India. And so they were defined from Dravidian people and Dasu people and Aboriginal Indian people a long time ago, and the Aryan people were considered to be pale and superior to their counterparts. And they were given a lower caste based upon their complexion. That's why you have the Varna caste system, the color-based caste system in India, which is even maintained to some extent to this day. And many individuals will not marry a person of a lower caste. And they know that essentially meaneth, to a certain extent, a sort of, how should it be said, racial hygiene, in which you are trying to maintain your Aryan, your Aryan ancestry, your Aryan genealogy. You do not want your family to be darkened with some Dasu or Dravidian. All right, the so-called Devas and Aryans in the old wars and the Vedas and all of those particular Hindu sacred texts, they did not destroy every single one of those darker peoples in India that were recorded by Apollonius to have come from Ethiopia. All right, that history is still something that is present, and we can read about it. We can find books about it. We can find very old books about it. But anyhow, you cannot do that with any other race or any other type of people, essentially, because basically a dark brown person or a brown person looks very much different from a pale person. So when you paint your face brown, that is a big statement. Anyone who knows the history of brunette-skinned people in the world knows full well that there's a history of mocking their appearance. So what is blackface? Makeup applied to a performer playing a black person, especially in a minstrel show. Okay. So we have American Heritage Dictionary. Make up for a conventionalized comic travesty of black people, especially in the minstrel show. So this idea of blackface is connected to comedy and black people, as well as the minstrel show. It is connected to mockery of black people. So how can you say, oh, blackface gets bashed? The very definition of blackface is a thing reference to complexion-based bigotry. You cannot separate the history and definition of the word from the video that you are making. Especially when you just say blackface gets bashed. You could say, you know, a man painting his face brown gets bashed. You could say that, but she decided to say blackface. All right? She decided to say blackface. She decided to utilize that terminology, which is essentially completely connected to the idea of the minstrel show and mockery of people of the black social status, darker people, Negroid featured people. All right? Very interesting. So we have that.
There was I think it was a controversy. Some liberals were saying like, oh, those foreigners that wear kimono, they are racist. I'm like, no. Japanese people were happy when foreign people wear and enjoy kimono. And with McNeil's logic, he has to think of Eminem as a racist as well, right? Because he's pretending to be a black guy. Like, it's so...
No. It has to do with a very obvious component of history. It has to do with the completely different features of black people in comparison to all other groups of people. We have dark skin. Every other group has pale and light brown skin. Everyone else has cream and light brown, tan-colored skin. The idea of blackface is to emphasize the darkness of black skin, their features, the redness of the lips, and so forth. So the curliness of the hair. There's a historical reason to, and even if it is just done in lightness, to expect those of us of the black social status to like that is ridiculous. So of course we are going to criticize it. So obviously it is still being done in Japan. So obviously we as people of the black social status, those of us individuals of the black social status criticizing blackface, is not stopping it from being done. We are not imposing our ideology in a very substantive, active way upon any of these individuals. They are still doing it. They are still doing this degrading art form. All right? Whether they want to consider it degrading or not, we can. And we can, in our opinions, criticize it. And for whatever reason, our criticism is making many Japanese people talk or feel a different way about blackface. And if we can educate people about the history of blackface, then I consider that to be a good thing. Though some Japanese people disagree. All right?
So ridiculous to me. Like, where's the freaking line? Like, up to every one of us. And why is it trying to control us, being in another country especially? So this accusation by McNeil is something that he took out of context, obviously, especially seen by us Japanese. And the Western media like BBC, the New York Times are basically attacking us by taking this up. Yeah, they are making the controversy in the English-speaking countries. So here's my question.
Japan is a global country. Japan has global relations. Japan trades with other countries. Japan, during World War II and even before World War II, engaged in imperialism, not only in Korea, but all throughout a good deal of East Asia and even Southeast Asia. So this idea that these foreigners are talking about Japanese people, what makes them think they have any sort of opinion or any sort of right to an opinion in regard to these matters? Yes, we do have every right to criticize something that is occurring in Japan, especially when our features are being sort of portrayed in this fashion. So obviously it is a global phenomenon. And the education is going to occur whether people like it or not. This part of history is going to be examined whether people like it or not. And as for this article, I do plan to talk about the crucifixion of Christians in Japan by the Japanese government at that time under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and how they, there was a crucifixion, many crucifixions of Japanese individuals, Yamato Japanese who were simply Christian. And I'm not talking about the Portuguese who were crucified. I'm talking about actual Japanese Christians who were crucified because they were Christian. So, of those uncomfortable historical topics I'm going to talk about, and blackface is one of those uncomfortable historical topics in Japan. It was introduced by the Americans, and it is a historical matter in the country. So, we're going to continue to talk about it. We're going to continue to criticize it. And we have every reason to.
Are those media outlets like BBC and the New York Times, are they ever this protective towards Asians or Japanese? No, never. Meaning that they are biased, so I'm like, shut the F.
Well, I mean, not necessarily. Not too long ago, many of us here in the United States heard about the anti-Asian hate bill that was passed, or some other things such as that. But furthermore, as we had looked, as we have seen, Japanese people and other Asian people, people have a history of being essentially associated with people of the white social status, at least from a Nazi German perspective. They do not have the same history as either Africans, foundational black Americans, people of the black social status in the Caribbean, and many other people of the black social status. They do not have the history of the Dasu or the Dravidian people. We can say differently about Ainu people. We can say differently about Okinawan people. We can say that they were discriminated against on a very broad scale, but can we say that about Yamato Japanese in general? No, we cannot. We can say that about the Biracuman, but that is sort of a sub-ethnicity within the sort of broader Japanese Yamato ethnicity. And that's sort of more of a social caste, if anything else, based more upon your sort of feudal status, your role, your job in Japan. Were you a farmer or a peasant, or were you a samurai? All right? Or were you a warlord or whoever?
What I mean is that when it comes to politics and history, those exact media outlets are the ones that are calling our Japanese ancestors rapists, for example. And they basically say all the...
Well, some of them were. Some of them were. It has been well recorded during World War II that some of them were. Not to mention the whole, weird culture of prostitution that was brought over to many other countries such as Korea during World War II, in which basically there was a mass abuse of women. And that is a historical fact that I happened to talk about in my last video about Yoko Ishii and how she denigrated the whole idea of comfort woman and many other such things. One moment, please, viewers. But yeah, she is talking about, some things having to do with comfort woman and some other matters. But anyhow, some of them were. Some of them were absolutely, ravishers, reavers of women and boys. Some of them absolutely were.
The time that we are evil and we have such a bad, awful history, and now they are accusing us for...
And that itself is a projection. Is she referencing who is calling Japanese people evil? No. Some people bring up Japanese history, I know that much. And much of their history during World War II was pretty awful in regard to what particular Japanese individuals did during that time. This is not some type of mystery.
or being racist as well. I guess it's coherent. To me, that kind of media is looking down on us rather. Aren't they disrespecting our historical views and cultural values? Because we feel that we are denied. The black man McNeil, he saw this in Japan and felt uncomfortable. And I'm like, why are you here to try and change our...
Well, one could ask the same question about why were Japanese people in other countries during World War II? Japan is a global country. He can go wherever he would like. The country allows different people to come to their country, to even immigrate there and have businesses and have jobs and basically, have a residence there in that country. If he feels uncomfortable about something that was historically brought to Japan by the United States that has a history having to do with his people, that many Japanese people either do not know about or are playing ignorant about, or pretending to be ignorant about, as to why a person with brown skin would feel offended or uncomfortable about pale Japanese people. Many of them think of themselves as being particularly pale, which if they receive a good suntan, many of them are, considerably darker, but nonetheless, many of the darker people there, whether they are African, whether they are foundational black American, or anyone else of the black social status, or even of the white social status, and they know the history of blackface, and they understand why it is a particularly offensive and derogatory art form, they are going to express their opinions. Why would anyone's ideas about something be considered to be particularly dangerous to Yoko Ishii, or how should it be said, something even worth her talking about? I find that interesting.
TV culture. What I'm trying to point out is, for example, should I live in the United States and show some victimhood whenever I see American comedians mocking Asians? Or should I live in the US and start collecting signatures whenever I hear somebody making a stereotypical jokes on Asians?
And here's the difference. She could talk about that, but is she providing any examples? This is 6 minutes, 41 seconds in. But you will see that she is not going to provide any particular examples about bigotry against Asians in this video. She won't do it. Alright? She's not going to show that. So if she can provide some examples of that happening here in the United States on the scale of a literal history of blackface that is literally hundreds of years old, that was known and practiced in Japan as introduced to them by the American people, by some particular American individuals of white social status, then we would have to ask. If she can do that, I would like to see that. I would like to see her show some examples comparable to blackface that have to do with Asians. She will not show that because there is nothing that has been done regarding Asians that has been on a scale in regard to mockery. It has never been on a scale of blackface at all, or even the human zoos that were done in Europe, in which certain African people were shown as though they were animals. She will not show that. So those of us of the black social status, when we see things like blackface, when we see that, we talk about it. Or some of us do. Some of us with a certain degree of dignity, that sort of spiritual, metaphysical type of thing, because that's what dignity is. You cannot quantify it physically. We feel the need to speak. And so words come out of our mouths and we start to say things that make particular people uncomfortable, either because they know about that history or they simply want to play ignorant about it, or even are ignorant, like genuinely ignorant. But either way, education, learning something new, is not something bad in regard to I would imagine, Japanese values, or peradventure it is, if you learn certain things. Maybe it is a bad thing in their views. That is to say, the views of particular individuals who have an intolerance to learning about different cultures. Alright, there's a sort of pretension in Japan by certain individuals that it isn't a homogenous country, and I've heard this. I think the Ainu would disagree. I think the Okinawans would disagree. I think they would greatly, vociferously, and I have seen them talk on their YouTube channels, their social medias, about how they disagree. About how they are different than the regular Yamato Japanese. They do not consider themselves such, and they are indeed a true ethnicity. Whether it be Okinawans, Ainu people, all these different types of people. Alright? They believe they have a unique identity, and I believe them. So, no, I do not believe the idea of Japan is a homogenous country. They cannot understand nuanced social and cultural matters having to do on a worldwide scale or even a national scale. Sort of an internal national scale in which they have to understand that they have Ainu and Okinawan people in their country. They all know this. So, obviously, this idea of cultural exchange and cultural differences is understood by, I would say, the average Japanese person. As far as I know, this is not a matter of a learning disability or anything of the sort. This is a matter of willful ignorance.
No.
In my opinion.
It's not the same because black people were enslaved and we weren't. The Japanese were pretty much enslaved by the Russians in the past. Also, our ancestors were put in the imprisonment camps in America, and we were nuked twice.
Can she elaborate about Japanese people being enslaved by the Russians? Can she actually elaborate upon that? Can she elaborate upon the Ainu presence in Russia and the Yamato presence in Japan? How were Yamato, pure-blooded Yamato Japanese, so to speak, enslaved by Russians? Can she talk about a literal chattel slave system, anything even comparable to the history of Negroid peoples being enslaved by Europe as well as the United States of America? Can she do that? No, she cannot. And that is why she has no evidence to present. This is just something that she says offhand, because really what she's saying is not very substantive. Can she give us one example of that? No, she cannot.
That we get bashed on the World War II today, which can be turned into jokes.
We get bashed. We, who is we, is a question we should ask. It's the collective, it's the nation. Real in a real sense. Or is the nation abstract? Because we can find people in her own nation, most certainly, who disagree with her. We can find people in her own nation who disagree with her about blackface. And if it were not the case, there would not be this matter of blackface being talked about in the public media in Japan. If it were not the case, you would not have skin whitening companies like Cow or whatever this one would be, basically removing whitening and lightening from their products. If they were not socially and culturally aware of basically darker peoples and their understandings and their differences and disagreements with some particular things in the wider pale populated countries, alright, they would not be trying to alter their language. Now, would they? Anyhow, viewers, I am going to take one moment.
Sometimes even. And do we Japanese start bashing white people or American people when they disguise as us or make jokes on us? No, we just see people as they are because we know.
And you have to remember, she said criticism. She said black people are criticizing Japanese people regarding this issue of blackface. That is what she said. And she's saying what we do as Japanese people, what we think as Japanese people, we, please specify the we. Who is the we? What does the we consist of? What is the we comprised of? This is why talk about nations is so very facile. And this is why I hold to no nation but that of the holy nation, the Israel of God. That is to say, the nation that I'm a part of, you can be a part of it too, anyone who's listening to this, and you do not have to worry about worldly nations. It is entirely spiritual in the truest sense. But anyhow, I do not need to be spiritually connected with worldly individuals who have worldly affairs in mind. But anyhow, what I would say regarding what she is talking about is that not every Japanese person obviously agrees with her, has the same Weltanschauung as her, thinks the same as her, and therefore to say that we think any other particular way than what they as an individual think as is quite ridiculous, because obviously an individual has individual opinions. So what is the we? The we is non-existent. The we is a rhetorical device that she is using for this very purpose of sort of justifying her points and her ideological projections, because she is ideologically projecting upon an entire people group that may disagree with her, or at least certain people who comprise that people group, certain persons, may have a different view about this particular matter than she does. Anyhow, that logical statement I have to make, or I feel I have to make it, and I like to.
That they have their backgrounds. You know what I think? People like McNeil takes things offensive and personal because he is not comfortable being a black man, especially in the Japanese society. That's what it is.
Very interesting statement. I wonder why. In a country that literally promotes cosmetic products to whiten your skin and has a history of literally being introduced blackface and still practice it today, even after most Western countries have stopped, it's very interesting. But if anything, I would entirely disagree with Yoko Ishii. I would disagree with her opinion, and I would say that if anything, McNeil and people like McNeil, who are of the black social status, who basically address matters such as blackface, actually are showing how much dignity they do have. And if anything, in my opinion, the very fact that they have dignity and are expressing their dignity is making her, Yoko Ishii, uncomfortable. That is what I perceive. Alright?
McNeil also said that the Japanese media should work with people from diverse backgrounds to prevent offensive content from surfacing. And I'm like, aren't you living in Japan? You know, that's the argument in America, not in Japan.
Well, obviously. However, and of course, how is she to speak for all Japanese? We would ask this. She may be a conservative Japanese woman who has some connections with other particular conservative, Nazi-aligned conservatives over there in Japan, but she certainly does not speak for all Japanese people. And this is her husband, beardless, no beard, no facial hair. At that age, forget about it. I could say corporate culture be damned, Japanese culture about corporatism and not having a beard be damned. I would say no. I'm not going to look more feminine than my wife. And that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. So, you know, the whole idea of not having a beard, of cutting off your facial hair off, you look so timorous. And he does. Anyhow, you know, or at least I think she's sort of, I'm pretty sure that's her husband, or, you know, I'm sure she's married to him and not really sort of her boyfriend or whatever, but some of these Japanese men, it would be so... I know I've seen Japanese men with beards. They look so good with beards. I mean, he's not a bad-looking man, but if he had a beard, I don't know, some facial hair, you know... I'm a bony man myself, but I don't know what it is. It's just, you know, the women have the long hair. I think the man should have some facial hair. You know, I don't know. There's something about some facial hair on the man like this that really makes them, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's her father, honestly. And I'm not saying anything bad about him if that really is her husband. But she's all so very involved in politics and so forth. But interesting. And, you know, he could be a politician. I'm not particularly sure. I haven't watched her channel in a long time. But anyway, enough talking about appearances. You know, these facile appearances are going to pass away when we take our last breath anyhow. So they really do not matter so much. Anyhow, what was I talking about? I forgot.
The majority of us are Japanese.
And this is the idea. That you see what she did? I just talked about Okinawans and Ainu. I talked about Burakumin also. I talked about the sort of samurai caste as well, and the sort of noble caste as well. To say we are all Japanese is as facile as saying that we are all American. Obviously, there are different ethnicities and different racial groups within the same country. This is the idea that I am basically expressing. Where did I get this information from? The minority rights group. They will tell you about Okinawans. They will tell you about the discrimination they face. They will tell you about Ainus. They will tell you about the discrimination they face. So similar to many indigenous people in the world, the Ainu were faced with colonialism from a technologically more advanced society, so to speak, which led to resistance, defeat, subjugation, destruction of traditional legal systems and leadership, and disregard of indigenous land and resource ownership. So this is a subjugated group in Japan. Japanese people are not just, oh, Japanese people are just Japanese. That's what Japanese people are. So we have, after the unification, the Ryukyuo kingdom became a formal tributary state of the Emperor of China. Although in practical terms the kingdom remained largely independent, this lasted for almost 3 centuries until a Japanese expedition to the islands in 1609 led the Japanese Tokugawa shogunate to lay claim to the basically Okinawa and their peoples. So yes, Japanese people are just Japanese. No, they are not. There's different groups within Japan. There's different people groups within Japan. It's not homogenous. This is something that, sad to say, many of these Japanese people were just not educated about. And they show poor education regarding race, culture, and ethnicity. They have pitiful education regarding this. And this is why when they become embarrassed, or a good deal of them become embarrassed, not all of them, there are some Japanese individuals who are able to understand cultural differences. They are able to understand them. Not every single Japanese person is like Yoko Ishii, and I should not even have to say that. We should know that, I would think. However, we're all learning, and we all need to basically engage in these discussions to learn. Alright? What she just said was ignorant from a cultural perspective. This is to essentially defeat the identities of Okinawans, of Ainu people, Burakumin, and any sort of social, cultural, ethnic, and racial differences that are present in Japan. I am going against this entire idea of homogeneous Japan, homogeneity in Japan. It is not true. It is a falsehood. Alright?
You know, yeah, there are foreign people as well, and there are some naturalized people as well, but we are coexisting. Why do you have to look at something and turn it into something else? I don't get it. And also, the misunderstanding often happens seen by foreigners that do not understand Japanese culture well.
Coexisting. Well, in coexistence, there are differences, as well as disagreements. Not to mention the fact you have immigrants of the black social status who are existing in Japan. You have people from different countries who are existing in Japan. They are coexisting with native populations, so to speak, and even sort of becoming part of those native populations through marriage, through citizenship, and the like. And whether it is happening slowly or quickly, it doth not matter, because it is happening. We know it is happening. There are people of the black social status in Japan, when they see things that directly involve them, their appearance and mockery and the usage of a particular art form that has been utilized traditionally in a traditional way and has a history in Japan, in the United States, of denigrating them, of mocking them. They may feel uncomfortable, and yes, I dare say they may criticize such an art form, and they are. That must make, I imagine, Yoko Ishii very uncomfortable.
Just because the majority of the population of Japan is Japanese, the culture must be like a homogeneous or something. Actually, our culture is very diverse, and that's why we have such a long history. Just as I said in my previous video, there are all kinds of foreign people here, including the respectful ones with common sense. Let me introduce Fifi.
Not just diversity from other countries, but also diversity within the country. This is something many of these Japanese people, they do not want to acknowledge that there are different types of Japanese ethnicities and groups and races. They don't want to acknowledge that. They don't want to acknowledge the difference between an Okinawan and the Yamato Japanese. They don't want to acknowledge the difference between an Ainu and the Yamato Japanese. They do not want to. They do not want to acknowledge the difference between a Bonin Islander and a Japanese person. They don't want to do that. They don't want to acknowledge the differences that they have. They want to say every Japanese person is defined under the category of Japanese. They don't want to do that. Some of these individuals do not want to do that, unfortunately. Now, there is another particular ethnic group called Bonin Islander. And that's sort of a different island where you have Japanese people who are discriminated against. They have a different culture. But in particular, I am mostly talking about Okinawans. I'm talking about about Ainus. I would talk about Burkuman if I had the article pulled up, but I don't right now. Anyhow.
To you, she's an Egyptian, but her heritage is African. I think she said on Twitter, but she has 400,000 followers, unlike McNeil. And
her heritage is African. Egypt is in Africa. She is an Egyptian, but her heritage is African. Egypt is in the continent of Africa. Think about how ridiculous that statement is. Think about how ridiculous that statement is. Egypt is on the continent of Africa. Therefore, that nation is on the continent of Africa. What can I say? I really do not know how to address that.
she said that, let me translate. So there are Japanese that want to get tan to be like black people, and some try to be dressed like black people even. And depending on the intention, blackface can be criticized, but just because somebody disguises himself as a black man, the person is a racist. I feel that the people that point out things like that are the very people that see races with superiority or inferiority. And this was retweeted over 11,000 times up to 2 days ago, so I'm sure that it's retweeted even more. But yeah, follow Fifi-san if you like, because she tweets in Japanese, but she is most of the time with us, you know.
With us. Very interesting. You keep hearing the collective identity. In other words, yeah, we sort of valorize blackface, which has a obviously racist history that's based upon mockery of, you know, people of the black social status. But we have one person who is with us. We're one coon, to use the colloquial foundational black American terminology, who is with us. Very interesting. Very interesting. Anyhow, let me continue.
tries to be respectful, and she has a great understanding of the Japanese culture and society, and we are very thankful for having people like her.
But look at the hypocrisy of that idea. She has respect for us, but Japanese people do not have to have respect and learn about the culture, or at least those who are performing blackface. They do not have to essentially learn about black American, or rather the culture of those who are people of the black social status, the things that we as people of the black social status consider to be derogatory to us. They do not have to learn about that, consider that, or even consider that to be in any way offensive. They do not have to engage in any sort of social enlightening. They do not have to learn. They have nothing to learn. They already know everything they need to know. And those of us of the black social status, no, we have to respect Japanese culture. We have to defer to them as they paint themselves as brown people. And yes, I'm saying brown people. I'm not saying, how should it be said, black people in this case, because we are black and we are, by social status. We were given that term by pale people. And when I say brown, I'm not talking about Latino people who are light brown. No, we are brown too. And that sort of differentiation of black and brown is quite ridiculous in my opinion, because if anything, we are those of us of the black social status are brown. We're brunette, copper-colored complexions. Those are our complexions. All right? When you have people who paint their skin brown or black, they know what they're doing. They know how ridiculous it looks when they go and look in the mirror and see how ridiculous they look. Look at how ridiculous that looks. It really is quite horrifying. It honestly is. And the naivete is not something that I or other people are going to excuse. We are no longer, or people like myself, we are not in ignorance regarding Japanese history and the complete mockery of people of the black social status. We know about our history, and some of us know about Japanese history, and we know this is a part of Japanese history. This was something that was introduced to Japan and stayed in Japan, and is something done to Japan to this day. If it was brought over to mock people of the black social status then, it is still used to mock people of the black social status today. Are we to believe that somehow the nature of blackface somehow changed ever since it was brought to Japan? Where did they get the idea from? They got the idea from Americans a long time ago. Americans of the white social status. They got that idea a long time ago. So, people like myself, we're not going to stop talking about it, and we're not going to stop criticizing it. If anything, we are going to do more so now than we did before. And no one is going to really stop us, just like no one is going to stop them from performing blackface. It is now a global embarrassment, and that is why it is being talked about in the Japanese public media. Japanese people are talking about blackface because it is making the country look bad.
Okay, let me now introduce thing that McNeil wrote on Twitter. He wrote, "Note to Japanese performing in blackface. Blackness is not a punchline nor a prop. Need jokes, get better writers. Need a black character, get a black actor that speaks Japanese. There are several, but please stop blackface Japan. 日本で blackface やめて not a good look." And I'm like, if a black guy does that, it kills all the humor. It's funny.
Why? Why does it? We know why it kills the humor, because this is done to essentially show blackface itself is to make the black, to basically show, it's sort of education to the audience. This is a minstrel, this is a clown, this is a blackface, this is black hair, look at that woolly hair. He looks like a sheep, doesn't he? Interesting, our Bibles say that the Ancient of Days had hair like wool. And we know that the Ancient of Days is the father of Jesus. And it says Jesus has hair that is white like wool. Well, if you make fun of us, you are making fun of God, essentially, by biblical definition. If you make fun of the black image, the image of your ancestors as pale people, as pale Japanese people, or anything else, because you all came from darker skinned people with woolly sheep-like hair. Jesus is the Lamb of God, and just like his father, he has woolly hair. And this has been recorded in our Bibles. No one can say, we don't know how God looks like. Nobody knows how he looks like. Well, we have it, at least in regard to Christians, those who follow Jesus, and not everyone does. But for us, if you make fun of that image, the image of black people who have dark skin and woolly hair, you're making fun of God himself. All races came out of the darker races. And now we are denigrated as black. But if you look at the sheep's skin, many sheep have a black face. It is a great honor for us. Now, my skin is not as dark as I would, you know, is not really, I mean, it's reddish brown. It's essentially, it is sort of ruddy brown. But that is not a dishonor to me. It would, if I had a choice in the matter, I would make myself darker. I couldn't do that. If I could make it as dark as night, I would. As dark as a sheep's face, I would. That's how much I love the darkness. And that may seem strange, but this is, you know, this says Jesus had feet as though they were burned in the furnace. And no, I'm not a Hebrew Israelite. I'm just a Christian who is stating the fact that we have this in our Bibles. Feet like they were burned in the furnace, not feet like they're still in the furnace. No, this is like they're burned in the furnace. As if you took them out. And it's no longer inside it. Obviously, if you burn something, it's black. It's dark. So we have a dark-skinned, woolly-haired God, who is the God of all things, and man is made in his image. And that the pale races are relatively new races. So this whole idea of we have to dress up, it's not funny if a person of the black social status does it. It's not funny if a person of the black social status does it. It's funny when we who are not of the black social status do it. That is sort of a way to differentiate ourselves from them. To show you, no, you see, this is a black person, this is a funny person. It's done for the same reason it was done when the Americans came to Japan and taught them blackface art. And those of us of the black social status, we know this. Those of us copper-colored, brunette men, we know this. Those of us ruddy brown men, we know this. We know it. Excuse me. We know it. Those of us brown men, we know it. So yes. Oh yes. We know this. Anyhow, let's continue. I am playing this one.
Because the Japanese is disguising himself as a black guy, and especially the character. And also, not a good look, huh? Okay, well, people like McNeil is not a good look of black people. He is degrading the black community. He is probably influencing the Japanese in the wrong way, that there are probably a lot of
No. What McNeil is trying to do is teach Japanese people how to engage with people of the black social status. He is trying to teach them that this is something people of the black social status, people who have a cultural and dignified understanding and bearing to them, do not appreciate. All right? There's a history behind blackface. There's a very obvious history to it. It has a history in Japan. All right? So for her to say he is disrespecting black people in any way, quite something. The projections are immense in this woman's words. They really are.
Japanese people that are angry at black people now thanks to him. Well, good that I'm here as Japanese in Japan, because I will point out that, it's not a matter of
angry at people of the black social status. I would ask this: what wilt thou do, and what will other people do? In other words, in colloquial slang, I would say this: you mad, bro? What are you going to do? What are any of you going to do? What are you going to do? Japanese people being mad about people of the black social status? What are you going to do? What are any of you going to do? And if you want to do something, I am just going to say this. If any Japanese people are listening to this, and you disagree with me, and you think somehow you're angry against any one of the black social status, I dare you, do something. Do something. I am actually very, very excited about that. Listen to Yoko Ishii, and do not listen to her, rather, but do something. Do something. You're angry at people of the black social status. Please do something. Because I think that would be very interesting to witness in sooth. Although I am not in Japan, I cannot really witness it, but I still would like to think that one of you did something because you were angry at a person of the black social status. I really am very interested. Does your anger or your contempt as an individual mean anything to any person who has dignity? That is the very interesting thing about dignity. You can do anything you want or have anger or contempt towards a person who is dignified and really will not accept a sort of, how should it be said, disrespect. But ultimately, your contempt and your disrespect and your anger does not mean anything to a person who has dignity, a real sense of dignity. Because you cannot really, it really does not matter if you denigrate them. They are still going to be dignified, and they are never going to really relent their dignity. Because that dignity is spiritual. We are not talking about carnal nations even. We're talking about something internal.
Of race, but it's this person in particular that's claiming. He's also happy that this issue is spreading around the world. I think that he is either like a leftist activist or a claimer.
Well, this issue is spreading around the world. It is. The skin whitening in Asia is spreading around the world. In other words, people are talking about what it is, what the implications of skin whitening are. They are talking about blackface because blackface was brought to Asian countries by the United States. People are talking about the Aryan idea that is held not only in Japan but also in Taiwan. People are talking about that too. Why are they talking about these ideas? They are talking about these ideas because these ideas are global ideas that have global implications. And I usually do not like saying the word global. I like to say the word worldwide. But they have worldwide implications. They have implications all over the world, essentially in every nation, in every inhabited nation, that is to say. So it is obvious why this issue, it has spread around the world a long time ago. This issue was being talked about a long time ago, before even in Japan. I have no idea why my internet is not really functioning all that well. Maybe I have too many tabs open. In sooth. But anyhow, yes. But this was being talked about a long time ago. This issue had spread around the world a long time ago.
Or someone that wants to sell out because he's an author that's infamous. Speaking of activist, he actually collected signatures in 2015, it seems, and he did stop this TV show segment or TV show itself. Like, there were supposed to be 2 blackface bands in Japan, but he stopped that from airing. And to me, he's like a political activist than an author, Like, why is he trying to control Japan?
Now, Yoko Ishii is an individual who oftentimes likes to call herself political and say that she is very involved in Japanese politics. All right? And you can see from her channel that she does engage in a lot of political things. One could very well say that Yoko Ishii is to some extent a political, social, and cultural activist, that she is sort of a proponent of a particular type of view or ideology in Japan, or at least to some extent is sort of promoting her own personal Weltanschauung, or a particular Weltanschauung, worldview, that is to say. So for her to say that anyone is a political activist and that somehow this is impertinent, it's very foolish. That man has every right to politically and socially activize as she does, until he is stopped. And who will do that? She says, well, Japanese people could get angry. Let them get angry. I am so interested in how an angry Japanese person looks and what he does, or she does. It doth not matter to many of us who are dignified people of the black social status, especially those of us who are Christian. We are very used to people being angry against us. We have not even begun to talk about the history of Christianity in Japan and how there was literally a concerted effort to engage in genocide against every single Christian in the country, and it didn't work because there's still Christians in the country. So that was a failure. That was a national failure, the national failure of genocide in the country. The culling of Christians did not work, even though they engaged in all manner of crucifixion. And I'm not saying they as in a collective sense, but that is to say the particular government officials during that time. Not everyone approved of this, obviously. All right? But my point is that all countries have their national embarrassments. I do not associate myself with a country. I speak in a very unbiased fashion because the only nation I represent is one you cannot see. I associate myself with an idea, and the idea I associate myself is with the Israel of God. I am therefore an Israelite of God in a spiritual sense, not in a carnal sense in any wise. So those are my standards. Her standards happen to be associated with a physical sort of, no nation is physical, a nation is an idea. But she associates herself with a particular island, a particular land, a particular government, so to speak, and even governments are spiritual. Ideas are spiritual. Ideas are intangible. Ideas are not things that you can touch, feel, sort of speak to or do anything to or with in a physical way. So obviously my allegiance is heaven. All right? Is the spiritual, not the physical. So I do not have to sort of associate myself with a national idea at all. Anyhow, let me continue. All right, I'm going to have to play this.
With black card. And the bigger question is, why is he in Japan doing these activities rather than America, his motherland, where the issue is way much bigger? And he is concerned that we Japanese will...
What is playing the race card supposed to mean? What is playing the race card supposed to mean when one is addressing a cultural matter that is related to you as a person of the black social status, or rather to him as a person of the black social status historically? That particular art form has to do with him. He is talking about it. He is criticizing about it. He is educating people about the history of blackface. So the question I would ask is, why would he not? He is in the country. Is he not wanted in the country? I imagine we could say the very same thing regarding, if that is her particular point, he is not wanted in the country. He's making Japanese people angry, which she did reference. We could say the same thing about Japanese people who went to the Philippines, China, and Korea during World War II. I imagine people were angry at them when military-aged men ravished women, ravaged towns, ravaged cities, engaged in all manner of horrible crimes. I imagine they were not wanted. I imagine they were making people uncomfortable. But they did it for a very, very long time. A very long time. So what all these Japanese conservatives want is for a country like that to get their weapons back. And, well, when they do, just about every single Asian country over there in East Asia and even Southeast Asia is going to feel uncomfortable when they do. And who knows what is going to happen, but I do not think it will be pretty. I would just say that if it were the case that the conservative Japanese dream, the Japanese conservative dream of them actually restoring their military power within the region actually did coalesce and actually did come to fruition, I think people would remember what was done. And they would say, well, you no longer have America protecting you. You decided to take up arms. And we've been waiting a long time to get back at you suckers. And it would not be pretty. That is just my opinion. And if it ever happened, I don't know. That's just a feeling I have. I just feel as though if that ever happened, all of those wounds that South Koreans and Filipinos and all of those countries, the Japanese, the Japanese military went to and made people uncomfortable and tried to make them speak Japanese and worship their emperor and all of those different things, promote Shinto in those different countries, I think a lot of people would feel uncomfortable. So this idea, Americans came here to Japan, they can't tell us how to do things. How dare they? This is coming from a woman who is living in the country that had basically occupied multiple Asian countries that are their neighbors. And for whatever reason, whatever retribution could have came to them, and they did receive massive casualties, but nowhere near close to the destruction that they laid waste to in Asia and the strife that they caused all throughout Asia with the Japanese military. And not they, but particular soldiers and so forth. This is not something laid as collectively Japanese people, but this is just an interesting concept. How dare you come to Japan and criticize something in Japan as a person of the black social status? This is the idea that's being presented. And with every idea that she sort of presents, I can simply say that is exactly what Japan did in regard to sort of imposing themselves in other countries not so very many years ago. So what is the point? What at all is the point? We could say the same thing about the Ainu, about what happened to the Ainu. We could say the same thing that happened to the Okinawans in regard to Yamato Japanese individuals who, for whatever reason, felt the need to subjugate Ainu and Okinawan people. All right? And Burakumin people. Particular people of a higher caste doing that. So anyhow, some people of the black social status do not like blackface, and they are talking about it. It is so simple. It is not complex at all.
Do something racist towards black people in the coming Olympics in 2020. Why would he think that? Like, why? I wonder what he saw in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Like, the next turn is ours, so we made a presentation there, right? I don't know if you remember, but our prime minister showed up. As what? He even disguised himself as a character. But as what? Mario! It's me, Mario! Yeah, because it's about Japan. Japan is holding the event, so we want to show
Mario is not blackface. It is quite ridiculous that a person really has to bring up these things that have a cultural history in Japan that she does not really even want to countenance. There's a cultural history regarding blackface. It is not the same as dressing up as Mario. Mario's not blackface. Mario's not something that we can look 100 years into the past and recognize that this has been done specifically to people of the black social status. We cannot look back in the past 100 years ago and see people dressing up as Mario. Maybe a time traveler went back in time and decided to dress up as Mario and sort of make a culture and history of that, but I have not seen any such thing. Peradventure, thou hast seen such a thing. I have not seen such a thing, such a phenomenon. Hast thou seen such a phenomenon? I think not, but anyhow, this is a ridiculous false equivalency that she is doing, and she is doing quite a lot of those. And many people who engage in pale supremacy, they feel the need to do this. This is something very specific. This is something historical. This is something that people of the black social status who know their history and have a certain degree of dignity do not at all respect.
Japanese stuff. You know, why does he think? McNeil, why? Why does he think that everything is about black people? If McNeil is having a hard time in Japan, I see the reason why. That is because of his personality, not his race. He also points out that the people overseas can watch Japanese TV programs live nowadays, and that Japan needs to be careful because we will be misunderstood if we keep running shows like this. But I know that such people that misunderstand us,
and it is obvious. And McNeil is actually, if he really did use those words, he is not being critical enough. Because in all honesty, we do not need to use that excuse and say that the Japanese public is ignorant at all. We do not need to use that excuse. Our disagreement, or rather, not an individual disagreement could be as simple as there's a history behind this. And peradventure, a person of the black social status may decide to say, this is something we disagree with or dislike because of such and such a history. And we have that history. We have images of this history. We have images of this occurring in Japan a long time ago and it being derogatory. We have images of this being taught to Japanese people as a culture, and there are multiple examples of blackface in Japan. Multiple examples of it. This is something that was being carried on ever since people of the white social status had brought it over from America. All right? A person does not even need to say, people will misunderstand the context. No, we really do not even need to countenance that idea. We can express ourselves and say we do not like it, and we are of the black social status, and we have a history of people mocking us by painting their faces brown and black. We have skin that's very much different from these people who are light brown, tan, how should it be said, pale skinned people all over the world. And for whatever reason, we are often mocked because our skin is brunette, brown, ruddy brown, dark brown, copper colored, what have you thee. It often is mocked. There's a history of it being mocked. Some of us who have wide noses are mocked for it. I do not have a wide nose. Some people do. Some people have thick lips. They too are mocked. All right? So, let me just show you a little example from one of the videos I made of blackface being done in cartoon form. And this is, in this particular video, Akiriyama, master of blackface. And as you can see, Mr. Popo, all these images are of a stereotypical, sort of disrespectful image of basically people of what may be called the black social status. All right? So all of that can be seen. You saw it. All right? You can watch that video if you want. It is called Akiriyama Master Blackface right here on my channel. All right.
A lot of other things anyway. If they are watching something Japanese, they need to understand our values. If it's not fun to watch, they can always quit. Nobody is forcing them to watch our stuff.
And the problem is values. If those are their values, if something that was introduced to Japan a long time ago taught to Japanese people, if this type of art is part of Japanese values, then there is a problem in regard to those of us of the black social status, and to think that we as people of the black social status are not going to talk about it is quite ridiculous and naive in a sense that is just ridiculous. But I do not even think it's naivete. I think it is a sort of ideological stubbornness to accept that people of the black social status have dignity. How can these sheep, how can these woolly-haired sheep, these black sheep, have any dignity? The goat-haired people are surprised. The dog-haired people are surprised. All right? For whatever reason. Okay. The Lord has hair like a sheep. That is what we are taught in our religion. You mock the person that looks like a sheep. For us, that's even a spiritual thing. You're mocking God. So our expression of our opinion is not violence. Our expression of an opinion, an expression of a disagreement, a criticism regarding the implications of a thing is very substantive, and if it were not, it would not be having an effect in Japan. In other words, if it were not something particular Japanese individuals were embarrassed about, they would not be taking programs off of their television schedule due to it having blackface in it. So they understand the implications, or particular individuals who are involved in that media industry, they understand the implications of it. Those individuals do, even if Yoko Ishii does not understand the implications and the significance of blackface in media and why people in media who work in those industries find it problematic. I have to slow down and take a breath. Excuse me. There we go. There we go.
For example, I don't watch The Late Show from America because it's so annoying, you know. And I can watch the videos from the show, but I don't because I choose not to. McNeil really needs to move on. Like, slavery history is awful, especially extra awful if seen from the present values. I do get mixed feelings when I am told to think about America as a whole.
What are present values in comparison to values are values in the ultimate sense? One would think, well, values subjectively or values objectively, as in one's conception of goodness or conception of evil. Did they change? Is the good in the past different than the good now, or is the bad now different than the bad in the past? We learn from ideas from the past, I would think, and many of us adopt the same ideas that our fathers and forefathers had, our predecessors had. So that is a very interesting thing to say. Analyzing slavery from present-day values, what it all is meant by that. It's difficult to do. What it all is meant by what she is saying, I am very curious.
In the past, or white people in general in the past. But that's why I am studying history. And guess what? This has taken a...
In the past. White people in general is the past. White is the social status. And no one even needs to really carry the weight of that title in sooth, because that title itself is a social status. That is what it is. It was created by paler peoples. But anyhow, many of the things she is talking about have such a high degree of nuance to them that she is not going to delve into at all. She simply does not, and she will not. But she says about the past as though there are not exploitive, imperialistic, colonialistic things occurring now in the present day. As though there are not what could arguably be considered racist things and bigoted things occurring now in the present day, which I find interesting.
away a lot of my bias towards America and white people. Towards the end of last year, I also saw a controversy in the US, which was about super white Christmas. And now I vividly see the pattern, which is that those who bring up racism, they have a misbelief that if you attack on the majority, then it equals to stopping racism towards the minority, which is false.
Which, how is criticism of particular cultural aspects or criticism of particular actions taken by, peradventure, paler peoples, just, paler individuals who, for example, put blackface on, put black or brown paint on their face, and so forth, and things of that nature. How is that attacking the majority? Furthermore, how is criticism in general attacking the majority? One would imagine, in a very real sense, that one could actually learn from criticism. Now, that is not any type of substantive attack. That is an ideological challenge. And one can learn from ideological challenge. One can refine one's own perspectives through ideological challenges. No one is bashing and no one is attacking. All that are being presented are intangible, spiritual, ideological, immaterial challenges that for whatever reason, Yoko Ishii seemeth to be very intimidated by and feeleth as though she should address it in a very, very vociferous manner and say that, oh, this is making Japanese people angry. Well, that is a spiritual matter. That is an immaterial matter. That is an ideological matter. That is an emotional matter. All right, that is a matter of passion. And so, obviously, passion is involved here. The spirit is involved here. And so, this is not something having to do with minority groups somehow gaining any type of hegemony over their so-called, ideological opponents, because this is ideological. This is not something so substantive as a sort of transfer of carnal, stately, worldly power. That is done with weapons. This is being done with ideas. Someone saw blackface and said something about it. Many people said something about it. And the Japanese media, people in the Japanese media, particular persons, are listening, and they are trying to adapt to a changing, to not necessarily a changing sort of demographic, but necessarily they are trying to alter their programming because their viewership is starting to, their viewers are mentioning this. There are darker people than them, it would seem, who are saying things about it. There are people who, whether you consider them to be minorities or part of the so-called majority, they are talking about it. And it is having an effect. So whatever they are doing, whatever type of ideological challenge that they are presenting is having an effect, and that is the point.
Oh, and I have to say, it's not how it works. It's so sad, I could actually make friends with people like McNeil, because what they're concerned about is actually the same as me, but...
What does having to be friends have anything to do with a matter of respect? Respect and being friends are not necessarily mutually tied together. I can respect a person who is not my friend, but I can also address the fact that I am not being respected. In sooth. So, this type of talk is quite ridiculous. The whole matter has to do with respect. It has to do with the fact that, for whatever reason, McNeil did not feel very respected by that presentation of blackface and felt that it directly denigrated people of the black social status, and he knoweth the history of blackface. I know the history of blackface, and many of us do know the history of blackface. We do not find it amusing. And our opinions had an impact. or at least those of us persons of the black social status who have talked about it.
I think what's separating me from those people is difference in our approaches to the problem. McNeil, for example, he's obsessed with the past and he's past oriented. But me, I know...
Obsessed with the past. Quite an assumption coming from a person who does not know the individual in question. Quite a projection from a person who, for whatever reason, always feeleth the need to talk about comfort women or World War II and Japanese war crimes and many other things, and made a whole song about comfort women to essentially denigrate them. Alright? She made a whole song about comfort women. She made a whole song about them. This arguably, in my opinion, very creepy little Japanese woman, alright, made a song about comfort women, who were basically women who were sexually used by Japanese men by force in a military sense. Alright? There was ravishing. Go to a dictionary and learn what the word ravish means. I'm not going to say the other word that starts with an R. There was a lot of exploitation in regard to sex. She made a whole song talking about these women who went through that. She wants to say that other people are obsessed with the past. This woman made a whole song, went through the effort of making a whole song about Korean comfort women, or even Chinese comfort women. Who can say? Because Chinese people were also comfort women. There were people as far as even, some countries in Southeast Asia who are comfort women. There were people who were being used by Japanese military individuals from all over Asia. They even had a few Europeans who were in those countries who were used as comfort women. Alright? Many of us wonder about the effect that those times had on the Japanese porn industry and why it is such a rampant factor in Japanese life to this very day. But we could say that of all countries in regarding the porn industry. But anyhow, that is not even worth talking about. But she dared to claim that that man was obsessed with the past, knowing her history on her YouTube channel and what she has talked about and made videos about, and for whatever reason seems to talk about even every single year without fail. World War II, comfort women, and some particular topics, and still responds to comments to this day, some in which she put her foot right in her mouth and did not listen to a warning when I basically stated, if you're making yourself look bad, I'm going to make a video about you. I did that with another account. And she probably thought, oh, this person's just joking. No, this is now a video about you. It may not even get many views, but I already made a video about her before. This is another one.
I know that we can't change the past, but I know that we can change how we look at things. We can always think of the meanings of what happened in the past, but in the end, I always come to this conclusion that if I am angry at the past or any stereotypes which were formed from the past, I have to become the legend. I want to become the good of today, or a turning point of history. And it doesn't start...
This reminds me of one of my favorite verses. What was it? Oppression maketh a wise man mad. Oppression maketh a wise man mad. Alright? Surely, oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. But what was that other one? Another particular verse. Remember the generations, the past. Okay, I know I'm sort of typing Remember the former things of old. Maybe that was one of those verses. But basically, we were told, those of us who are Christian, we were told to remember the things of old. We were told to, I think there was one that talked about remember the generations. But basically, we were told oppression maketh a wise man mad. We were also taught to remember the days of old. All right? Look at the generations of old and see, did ever any trust in the Lord? We're told to remember the generations of the old. So obviously, we trust in the Lord and we remember the days of old. Not to say that we cannot forgive, but regarding dignity, those of us who have it are going to have it. We're going to display it. If Japanese people do not like the fact that we're going to say something about blackface, if particular Japanese people, that is to say, not every singular individual, doth not like that we, or some of us, who are people of the black social status, persons of the black social status, are going to basically talk about this and not justify this and really say this is something unacceptable in our eyes. We've drew the line at this in our own personal opinions.
By accusing others in their own places, because everything is a consequence of the past. And it doesn't start by hating others either. It doesn't start by being self-centered. It starts with respecting and understanding others, and you showing and bringing the good to the world.
All right, if this is true, you are supposed to respect. You are not supposed to hate. Why are the comedians still doing blackface when they know they have been told by particular media publications who have even pulled programming off of television and said blackface has a pretty terrible history behind it for whatever reason, and this is something that our viewers may find issue with or may make Japan look bad on a national scale, and it's being talked about all over the world. If this is so, why are the comedians and the other Japanese people who continue to do blackface not having a sense of understanding, a sense of love towards those who are people of the black social status, and deciding, wait, this is something that we should not do. It has a harmful connotation and implications toward people of the black social status. Therefore, we should not do it. But instead, they continue to do it. Particular individuals in Japan continue to do it.
And then automatically and naturally things will come together in the right way. And this is because human beings are not as awful as people tend to think. We are actually beautiful, People are more beautiful than you are told to believe. It's the media or certain, agitators that brainwash you. But we are beautiful people.
What is this babble? What is this babble? It does not have to do with the subject. If you are so beautiful, why do you have to paint your face brown? Why do you have to do blackface? What are you emphasizing? Why are you emphasizing the difference between brown people and pale people? What is the problem? Why can't you just do an impersonation without painting your face brown? There's no problem with putting on an afro wig and sort of maybe doing an Eddie Murphy impersonation, but you had to paint your face brown. You had to do it. That was something you felt the need to do. Those Europeans, those Euro-Americans brought that art form to Japan, and it is still being done. And regardless if people know or not, people are going to be educated by those who are of the black social status, and hopefully they will have the humility to receive that education. And whether they like this having any sort of impact in the world or not, it is going to have an impact on the world. If this is continually done, and it is being done, more people talk about it all over the world. This is a country where people are traveling worldwide. And when people of the black social status see that, they do not like it. They do not. There are going to be a lot of people who will feel embarrassed, but they need not feel embarrassed. They should just simply take the criticism as it is. Should a Yamato Japanese not be criticized by a lowly peasant of the black social status? How dare any of us talk so of Amaterasu's beloved people? How dare any of us do that? Oh, the sun goddess is frowning on us now. But this is not how the world works when you have emperors who declare, I am not God, after they lose World War II. When basically the declaration during that time of his reign was that he was God, and every emperor before him claimed to be God. Now they are no longer God. And the days of the warlords had ended a long time ago, but now the emperor is no longer God. But they were considered God a long time ago in that culture in Japan of Yamato, pure-blooded Japanese, better than those Ainu, better than those darker people, those Okinawans or whoever else. Okay. It's just, you know, you can research it. You can research how they're treated. This is not a homogenous country. That excuse does not hold water. That justification does not hold water. This sort of Beverly Hills Cop, you really had to paint your skin brown to do that? It is time to learn. It is time to stop being ignorant. It is time for that naivete or that play at naivete to completely be destroyed. It is. It doth not matter how many conservatives you know here in the United States. It is time for that to be essentially dismantled with the light of education, the light of knowledge, enlightening you, because you were once in the darkness of ignorance. Now these Japanese people get to learn. They get to understand something new. Their minds get to understand what black people of the black social status think of this particular art form that they were given a long time ago. Time for learning to occur. And it will, whether Yoko Ishii liketh it or not. And she made that video 6 years ago, but the same remains true. This message came late, came very late.
At the bottom of our heart, and something is stopping us from being that person. So we have to notice that. And how do we notice that? You have to learn the history. You have to see the past patterns. So then you will seriously understand why you are here as you are, and how things are there, how they are, and what we need to do, and so on. I can summarize this.
The most amusing thing about all of this is that the reason many of us are talking about blackface is because we do know the history. We do know that this particular art form that is denigrating, that is mockery, that is a minstrel show, had been promoted in Japan and had been carried forth in Japan and used in Japan ever since it was introduced. They were taught that black people were comedic creatures, funny creatures, something that was a mockery of the existence of a human, something that was just in nature funny. And this practice of blackface spread throughout Asia. As Americans traveled, they spread this. They were bigots, and many people in Asia are bigots. Many people here in the United States are still bigots. All right? And this bigotry had the effect of essentially reducing a whole type of individual to comic relief. It relieves them to see a black person because a black person is funny. Or in the porn industry, he just has a big rod, and I guess it's bigger than anyone else's, and everyone says, wow, he's really packing, but do not let him around my daughter. Even though you watch some porn, probably in secret, and your wife does not know it, and you're watching black men go with some Japanese woman, you're saying, I really like this porn, but no, I would never want my daughter to get involved with a black man. Okay, and yeah, you fantasize about having... Anyhow, those are all projections on my part. But many of us know about the porn industry in Japan and how even though blacks are not necessarily viewed, or sort of not necessarily treated with the utmost respect, many of us know that they have a presence in the Japanese porn industry. So there's a weird dynamic where you have disrespectful things like blackface that were introduced to Japan by Americans still being done. You have black people in the porn industry on a very massive scale. Okay. And yet, for whatever reason, there's just also a sort of underlying context of disrespect for darker skinned people, even Filipino people. And at the same time, you have the sort of valorization, the sort of holiness of white skin. No skin is this white, but there's this idea, there's this concept. This is really, 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 really holy. This is excellent. Maybe Amaterasu herself has such skin. Just so excellent. The sun goddess. Oh, hail the goddess. Okay, this is Shinto. Okay, but anyhow, I just have to say that because I know some of the Japanese conservatives, and I like saying that, I know some of the Japanese conservatives are really big about that Shinto and emperor worship stuff. All I have to say is I would love to see your shrine to the emperor, to the imperial family. I would love it. I would love it. Would I laugh to your face? Maybe I would. Maybe I would not. Honestly. But when after World War II, when the emperor declared, "I am not God," what an amazing day. God's will right there, in my opinion. If only so many other men could adopt humility of that sort. But anyhow, I do believe I'm getting somewhat personal, or if not just simply projecting some of my own opinions about the matter.
Video in a short sentence actually. If McNeil says stop blackface, I'll tell him to stop being a hater. So that's all I have to say for today. So let me know what you thought of the issue, and also before I go, if you can, please support me on Patreon. If you already are.
Yes, give her money. Give her some money. Anyhow, she called him a hater, and what was he hating about? What was the expression of hatred? His criticism of an art form that has a clear history of being used to denigrate black people. Not necessarily black people, people of the black social status. That's to say, brown, copper-colored, bronze people of the black social status. All right? Those of us of the black social status are haters because we criticize the Japanese practice of blackface in Japan. How incredible. How incredible. Interesting. Anyhow, let me play the rest of this video.
Are helping me. Thank you so much. Like, you're seriously helping me so much, and I really, really appreciate it. But yeah, if you can, please support me there. So thank you so much for watching this long video. I really appreciate it. I'm so thankful that you guys are there to hear what I have to say.
Indeed.
You don't know how much it means to me, because I feel like Japan is always misunderstood, like this case.
Not really.
And yeah, the language barrier is there. I want to take that away. So support me if you can. So make sure.
Yet she is speaking English just fine. Just fine.
To subscribe and also follow me on Twitter.
So there's no problem on that account in regard to this video. And it is quite common. Every single person from every single country basically is learning English now because it's the international language. And there's a big problem in Japan because the English teachers who go there, I mean, there are just real difficulties. That's a whole nother discussion to get involved with. But basically, for a language to not be as taught as it is, when you know this language is essentially the international language of commerce, and even the Filipinos who go there, basically, even if they do not know Japanese, they know English. So the people you are working with who come from other Asian countries are using English as sort of a type of, how should it be said, a language to communicate with on a mass scale. And immigration is only going to increase as the population lowers and ages even more quickly in Japan, because for whatever reason, people are not having children, and they should be. Maybe they should be learning from Mike Salvini or something and learning how to do male health exercises and grow their penises, which is a whole nother matter. DLD, double long daddy. this man, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to look at images because they might show me something I don't want to see right now, and I'd have to blur something out. I do not know how to blur things out. Anyhow, that's a whole other thing. If you do not know about the Matters of Size Brotherhood, I've been a part of it for the most part for a very long time. Their exercises are excellent.
Because I tweet random stuff, because I'm random.
And what I just said was very random, so.
Yoko. Okay, thank you for watching, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Okay. So we listened to her whole video. Okay. So I wanted to do this video a very long time ago. I am finally getting around to it. This is how I avoid getting in copyright trouble. I don't know. I mean, personally, I think he would look so much manlier with a beard. I mean, you have a young wife like this, at least have a beard. At least have some facial hair. In my opinion, I just think you look so... There's such a lack of intimidation. If she puts some heels on, she'll look so much taller than you. It's just... Personally, I do not know how people deal with these things. I think a man should have a certain degree of presence. And here's another instance of blackface, but we're not going to talk about that right now. This is a cultural... This is a thing that is... And you see how she's laughing because I talked about that. She thinks it's funny. So she expressed that in this video. This was a very interesting video for me to do. Anyhow, I suppose this is it. I suppose this is really it. So I would simply like to say, viewers, I really quite enjoyed it. Enjoyed this, making this video. I do hope you learned something from it. May you be blessed, and farewell.